Guys, this is Pastor Tim. It's so good to be with you. I hope you're having a blessed week. Again, we are on our study called Taking the Future Seriously. And tonight we're going to jump right into this. We're looking at a subject called Insights into or Insights from the Naked Communist. And this book title is taken from a 1958 book called The Naked Communist. We're going to look at some issues that's Mr. Skozin, who is the publisher of this book, the one who wrote the book, had to say about communism and what's going on around the world and what is related to communism. Now, in Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War, he said, coined the phrase, know your enemy. In other words, you have to know who your enemy is. I'm reminded of the Keith Green song, Nobody Believes in Me Anymore. For those of you who are older, know who Keith Green is. Keith Green was a recording artist, Christian recording artist back in the early 80s. And he was really popular when I was first a Christian. I got saved in 1982, and he was very popular in the early 80s. Unfortunately, died in a tragic plane crash. Very talented musician, songwriter. And Keith Green always wrote very hard-hitting, strong, convicting lyrics to his song. They were just very powerful songs. And he wrote this song called Nobody Believes in Me Anymore. And the basis of the song was about the devil, as if the devil was singing this song. And he said, I've already got these people deceived because they don't believe I exist. And so I would like to liken that to how people react to communism today. Nobody believes in communism anymore. It's so ironic when you say that this is communism. People look at you often with this glazed over kind of bewildered look, like you got three eyes. And the reason this has taken place is at the end of the Cold War, communists really deceived Westerners into believing that communism was no longer a major threat in the world. And in the meantime, communists around the world began to influence, take over, and gain power in governments such as Communist China. And in the United States of America, we have seen over the last several decades, goes clear back into the early turn of the century in the early 1900s, where communists began to devise a plan to slowly through the law of gradualism, to slowly infiltrate areas of our country and build communist influence within those areas. So today we have communists that are grossly embedded in our federal government, state governments. We have communists that are embedded in areas of major influence, of course, in academia. Academia is full of communists. There are numerous communist professors in academia. We have communists within the entertainment media industry, Hollywood, the music industry. We have communists within the judiciary. We have communists even within the Christian church, both Catholic and Protestant. And so they have quietly, behind the scenes, undetected in many cases, most cases, worked themselves into a place of power, where today we are staring down the barrel of communist ideology in our federal government and our local governments as well. And we are seeing that the idea behind this, of course, is the same goal that communists have had for decades, and that is to eventually bring down capitalism, Christianity, and the United States of America itself. Because the objective is to communists see capitalism, Christianity, and all religion for that matter, but especially Christianity, because Christianity has been the driving ethos of American history throughout its existence. So the idea is to destroy Christianity in the West, destroy capitalism in the West, and then ultimately to destroy the United States of America, to subvert it from within until the structure is gone and it collapses from within due to moral rot and economic decay. And they have been very successful, I'm sorry to say, in their endeavors, and are even more so. And in the last year, it seems that we've really seen the mask pulled off of communist ideology in the United States. And we're going to get into some of this tonight. So in his book, The Naked Communist by W. Cleon Skousen, he first published this in 1958. It's been republished, rewritten a number of times. Latest is 2014, I think. And I look at this book as really the definitive history of communism, going clear back to Karl Marx, Lenin, the evolution of communism, takeover of Russia by the communists. Remember, Russia wasn't, the former Soviet Union was not always communist. Of course, people will say, well, it's not communist today, but communism is still there. And the moorings behind Russia is still communist. Vladimir Putin used to be a member of the KGB. He's a communist. And the hardline communists are still in Russia. And they're just biding their time and working behind the scenes, but they're there. And of course, then communist China. We still have Cuba. We're just seeing communism in Cuba. We have communism in Argentina, in South America. We have communism in Vietnam. We literally have as much or more. We literally have more communism right now in the world than we really have ever had in our history. So the notion that communism is dead, that communism is no longer a very real and present threat to the West is pure nonsense. Just because we're not having, like we had during the Cold War, where this threat of, we're constantly hearing about, nuclear war, and this idea that, well, we got to disarm, we got to get rid of these nuclear weapons, because if we drop the bomb on each other, we'll destroy each other. And that's still a very real concern of people, but it's nothing like it used to be during the Cold War. And there were times during the Cold War where people were literally scared witless that we were going to be nuked by Russia and completely wiped off the mat, or that both countries would fire nuclear arsenal and destroy the whole world. And so one of the things, Skousen goes back and through the history of communism and brings us up to the current state. And he also talks a lot in his book about communism within the United States of America. And you may be wondering, why am I as a pastor not just preaching the Bible tonight? Why am I not giving you just a Bible lesson here instead of talking about communism? Because we as Christians in the West, and Westerners in general, must wake up to the reality that the greatest threat to our freedom, the greatest threat to our faith in this hour is communism. It is by far the greatest threat. Now, I would say within that also radical Islam, but radical Islam and communism have always worked hand in hand together. And I believe they will continue to work hand in hand together. And that I believe that the Antichrist system that will come into the world and in the last days will be a combination of radical Islam and communism. These two will work hand in hand, and they will be, because they have been the two greatest enemies to Christians throughout the history, since their history, since communism. Islam has always been an enemy of Christianity, and we're seeing this play out as the Taliban right now in Afghanistan are murdering Christians by the droves. We saw it in Iraq, where Muslims, followers of Islam, were killing Christians and committing genocide in Iraq. We've seen it throughout the history of Islam, beheading of Christians, murdering Christians, and it's taking place right now in Afghanistan, thanks to the debacle by our president. So The Naked Communist, we're going to look at some points here out of this book. And he says in his book, one of the quotes in his book, he said, "To head off an enemy, it is first necessary to know where the enemy wants to go. The communists have made no secret about this. Their plan, first of all, is to take Asia, then Africa, next Europe, and finally, the United States of America." And if we look at what's gone on in a lot of African nations, we look at what's gone on is going on in Asia. I mean, we see China. China is completely communist, and China is on a quest to take over all of Asia and turn it into communism. And they are making roads into Africa right now. They're paying African governments to come in and make settlements. The Chinese Communist Party is knee deep, unfortunately, with the Biden administration, regarding the Taliban. So the Chinese are going to come in behind us, our debacle there, what's happened thanks to this president. They're going to come in and they're going to make a deal with the Taliban, and they're going to come in and mine all the minerals and so on that we should have been doing, but they're going to come in and do that with the Taliban. And so basically, Mr. Biden has made a way for the Chinese to come in and mine the minerals that they're going to take back to China, turn into batteries for our ridiculous battery-powered cars that he wants people to buy and drive around. So this is just bad from start to finish. But in his book, The Naked Communist, he lists 45 current communist goals. And I say current, even though it was published in 1958, as we go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. But as we go through some of them, you will see that for the most part, they have fulfilled almost all of these goals. And it's quite alarming. And so we're going to pick up here tonight and we're going to talk about a number of these goals from the Naked Communists that the communists have openly said they want to accomplish. Now, if you look around the world right now, if you look at what's going on with the Great Reset, if you look at what's going on with climate change, this is pure Marxist ideology. It is creating, the ideology behind communism is to create a crisis, create strife and tension, and create out of it chaos and destruction, and then out of that you gain power. We are climate alarmists right now. Oh, we have climate crisis. And again, I've talked about this before. Climate change is one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated upon the world. And the reason it's there is to get people afraid, because they work on fear. And that's why there's so much fear being propagated to the people of the world right now, in the United States. So much fear about this virus, because they want you to be afraid. Because out of fear, you will give up your freedom. I mean, how many Americans have you looked at on social media and so on, that they're willing to do whatever government officials tell them in order to keep them safe? Well, we've got to get rid of our rights. You have celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger using expletives saying, blank your rights. We need safety. So people are willing to surrender their freedom to a totalitarian regime, surrender their freedom to the government in the name of safety. And I remind you of what Benjamin Franklin once said: those who would give up fundamental freedom for temporary safety deserve neither freedom nor safety. And we're facing that right now, where Americans are so willing to just oh yeah, we've got freedom of speech. Oh, we can't have people talking about anything that disagrees with the prescribed narrative, because that's false information, even though all the false information almost is coming from the government itself. We have to censor people. We have to shut people down. I've had videos flagged on YouTube, supposedly because it shared false medical information. So the idea is we have a nanny state that thinks they need to tell us every bit of information and scrutinize. This is totalitarianism, folks. It may not be hardline totalitarianism yet, where they're shooting you in the streets, but it is totalitarianism. And the objective, what always comes from soft totalitarian, the next step will be hardline totalitarian, especially if the government can disarm us. And the next time you hear somebody say, well, nobody's trying to take away your guns, that's nonsense. That's just fear mongering. Believe me, they want to take away your guns. Just saw a congressman this weekend who stated that there are two bills that just are buried in committee in the Senate, and he said prays they never see the light of day because they will obliterate the Second Amendment. Down in the state of Illinois, they have passed bills. They've passed a bill that attacks the Second Amendment. Basically, you have to register your firearms every year. If you let that registration lapse, the government can come in and just confiscate all your guns. If anyone reports you, doesn't have to be medical, doesn't have to be a policeman. If anybody reports you as being suspicious or a threat, the government, for no reason can come in and confiscate your firearms. So it's totalitarianism. This is crazy anti-Second Amendment stuff that should not be happening in the United States. The right to bear arms is for citizens to protect themselves from the government and tyranny, not just to hunt. And I know Mr. Biden is breathing out threats against the citizens and saying, well, you know, if you're going to attack the federal government, you're going to have to come against tanks and jets and so on. Nobody is talking about attacking the federal government. What we're doing is we're talking about the right to defend ourselves, first and foremost, from criminals, but if necessary, and we have to defend ourselves against the government. We pray that day never comes. And I am in no way, shape, or form advocating any sort of violence, because that is exactly what these thugs want us to do. They want people to become violent, because then, as the head of this Homeland Security has been saying, the greatest threat to our security are domestic terrorists. In other words, patriots like ourselves, those who are God-fearing, gun-owning patriots. We are the greatest threat. Insurrectionist. This is the kind of rhetoric we're hearing. Well, make no mistake about it. They're saying these things for a very definite reason. This is nothing more than communist propaganda. This is not just somebody blowing smoke. This is pure, unadulterated communist propaganda that's being pushed on the American public. So when the time comes, they need to turn the public against people, they can do that. So let's look at some of these goals from the Naked Communist that is stated in his book. Number 4, goal number 4, communist goal number 4, permit free trade between all nations regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. I remember the NAFTA that President Bill Clinton pushed through Congress, fast-tracked through Congress. Well, we've seen the devastation that NAFTA has brought about. I know people will say, no, NAFTA was a great thing. No, we lost our manufacturing base to China and other countries because of NAFTA. Manufacturers packed up their bags and left because it was cheaper to do business in other countries where they were not so regulated by the government and EPA regulations and so on and so forth as they were in the United States. And that's why President Trump, fortunately, was trying to work to break down NAFTA, refocus it and restructure it so it wasn't so overbearing on American businesses. But we lost thousands of manufacturing jobs thanks to NAFTA. President Bill Clinton sold technology to the communist regime in China. President Bill Clinton pushed through favored nation status for China. I remember watching the hearings about that, and there were people who had defected from China to the United States, and they were saying in the hearing that the Chinese they're torturing people. They're using people, cutting their body parts out and selling them. They're murdering people, and we have no business giving them most favored nation status. But the greed of human beings wanted China because they saw China as a great opportunity to make a lot of money. And so then we have China, becoming wealthy and becoming militarized because of the trillions of American and Western and dollars that we pumped into that country. I remember Hal Lindsey, who is well known for the book, The Late Great Planet Earth. And Hal Lindsey used to have a program called The Lindsey Report. And in the 90s, I remember watching Hal Lindsey speak about communist China. And this was after Bill Clinton had sold them technology. And he said, when we came against Germany in World War II, we were literally fighting against technology that we had sold to Germany. And so he said we could end up fighting against the very technology that we provided to China. Well, look at China now. China has one of the biggest militaries in the world. Their Navy is now bigger than our Navy. And they have used the wealth, much of the wealth that they've gleaned from the West, gotten directly from us as a country, to build a military. And there are companies in the United States of America. This is pathetic. There are many companies within the United States of America that are doing business with China, and those dollars that they're doing business with are going directly to the communist party of China, and they're using that money to build a military regime. So we're literally committing our own suicide. This is just insanity. And this has been going on for years and years and years. And unfortunately, now we have a president in the White House that basically is owned by China. The media is owned by China. Much of the media today is owned by China. Do you ever wonder why the media doesn't call China out on its human rights abuses? Do you ever wonder why the Hollywood doesn't make movies criticizing and slamming China? Because China is heavily vested in Hollywood. China is heavily vested in many American industries today and around this country. And so people are afraid to call China out for fear of being blackballed. But China is a very real threat. And Hal Lindsey, I remember him putting out a number of memos, stating a number of memos by Chinese military generals stating that they did not fear a war with the United States and emphatically believed if they went to war and when they went to war with the United States, they would win. And make no mistake about it, China is at war with the United States right now. It is a cyber attack war upon our sovereignty, but their goal is eventually a military war against us. So when you have the head of the Department of Homeland Security making ignorant, stupid statements about the greatest threat to America is patriots within our own borders, domestic terrorists, or you have the chiefs of staff saying the greatest threat to America, our security, is climate change. Last time I checked, I thought the greatest threat to America was possibly China. I mean, I'm no expert here. I'm not a military general, but I think anyone with a brain can figure out the greatest threat to the world and to our sovereignty and to our existence is communism and communist China. And I don't make any bones about that. Now, I'm making a distinction. I'm not talking about Chinese people. The Chinese people are being oppressed by their own government. I mean, they're torturing and murdering their own people within China. Chinese people are living under an oppressive regime. That's not the Chinese people. And this is, the Chinese government itself, the communist Chinese government is totalitarian to the max, and it is horrible. And not the Chinese people. And so we have to make a distinction between the two. So that's goal number 4. Goal number 11 is to promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it is set up as a one world government with its own independent armed forces. So climate alarmists and a number of people over the last few decades on the left especially have been really calling for a global type of entity that would rule the world. Now, President Barack Obama, if you remember under President Obama, there was constantly a push to undermine the sovereignty of the United States. I have had conversations with a number of people on the left over the last years, and I've had people say, well, why do we even need borders? Why should we have borders? Well, I like to say, why do you have locks on your house? Do you have passwords on your computer accounts? Do you have a lock on your car? Do you have if you have those things, then you believe in borders. We believe in borders. Borders are significant to keep things out you don't want in. And the idea that we should not have a national sovereignty is crazy. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. And we have an administration, we have had 2 administrations, the Obama administration especially, and the Biden administration that is on steroids in bringing people across our southern border and shipping them all over the country by the thousands to infiltrate this country with people that are undocumented, people that we have no idea, they're not vetted, that we don't know who they are. And we ship them off and say, oh, come back for a trial in a few months, which most of them never show up. And so we have all of these people that are illegal, and their goal is to make them legal citizens and grant them sovereignty, grant them immunity, and put them on the voting rolls so that, of course, they'll vote for Democrats. That's the goal behind it, is trying to break our country over. It comes out of a communist idea called the Cloven-Priven idea, where you overload the country so much on social needs that you eventually collapse it. This is why our government is drunk with spending money right now. $22 trillion we spent in 1 year. We printed $22 trillion last year. We're talking about budgets in the trillions. We're talking about every time we have a spending bill, it's not in the billions or millions anymore. It's in the trillions. When you're spending money you don't have and having to borrow it in the trillions of dollars, and your total obligatory debt right now, which means Social Security, Medicare, debt down the road, we have over 200 trillion in obligatory debt right now. We have over 20 trillion in debt, most of which is owed to the World Bank, some of which is owed to ourselves. But we have a massive amount of debt that goes far beyond our gross domestic product right now. And yet we have people continuing to say, well, we need to come under the sovereignty of the United Nations, going back to this idea that we need to get rid of nationalism. And if you talk about nationalism today, if you talk about standing up and being proud of the United States of America, somehow that's bad, because we have a whole generation of people, a massive amount of people in this country that have been indoctrinated with communist ideology to hate their own country. I mean, for crying out loud, we have a whole generation growing up that hate the very country that they live in and are free. And I think the reason for this is because they're so pampered and indulged. I hear these people talking about oppression. You know, we have leftist feminist movements that are, oh, women are so oppressed. We got to get rid of men because we're so oppressed. They don't know what oppression is. Go over to Afghanistan right now. I'd like to have the pussy carrying pink, you know, pardon my language, the women we saw a few years ago marching, wearing, you know, vaginas on their head. I'd like to see them go over to Afghanistan and tell me about oppression. That's oppression. That's oppression of women. Living in the United States of America, there is no woman oppressed in this country by this nation. It's just nonsense. But this is a constant drum beating to cause people to dislike the very country they live in and take it for granted, because then they can subvert it and undermine what we're doing. Communist goal number 15. Let's look at this one. Capture one or both political parties. This is in his book, Capture One or Both Political Parties. Now, remember, he wrote this in 1958 originally. And if we look at the Democrat Party especially, and this is why I will not vote for Democrats, the Democrat Party has been completely taken over by communists. Almost all, if not all, the current Democratic leadership in our government have direct ties to communism. We know that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, was doing business with the Chinese. The media has buried that completely. We know that Joe Biden himself has direct ties to the Communist Party. Our leadership in the government, a lot of communist influence. And I'm not saying that there are not Republicans, because there are a lot of Rhino Republicans that also are walking hand in hand with the Communist Party. This is why we can't get the Republicans to fight for the American people either. We can't get the Republicans to stand up and take a stand. Now, there are a few, but because we have so many Rhino Republicans that have their hand, you know, they're being paid off and being fed by communist ideology, being paid off by the communists to cover for them. And so we need to really get rid of these rhinos in government, like Mitch McConnell and these people they have no loyalty to the American people. Different people, Mitt Romney, these guys are rhinos, and we have a lot of them, and they're old line establishment Republicans that need to be gotten rid of. The Democrat Party itself, I think, is completely lost. The Democrat Party is completely communistic. And it just amazes me how Democrats will be so loyal to the Democrat Party and they can't see the forest for the trees. This is not your father's Democrat Party, folks. If you read the Democrat platform, for instance, now I will say this, if you read the Democrat platform and you read the Republican platform, I would urge you to do so, because people say, well, they're basically the same. No, they're not. Look at the Republican platform, go online and look at it, and then look at the Democrat platform. The Democrat platform reads like a socialist communist ideology platform. Nothing about patriotism, nothing about the family, nothing about God. As a matter of fact, this is the same party that voted to remove God from its platform. That tells you something about the Democrat Party of today. This is an anti-God, anti-American communist party today. It just simply is. They ought to just call themselves the modern Democrat Communist Party because they're communists. If they weren't communists, they would not be fighting to try to take away our guns. They would not be fighting to limit religious expression. They would not be fighting to limit and censor people. This is pure communism. Well, communist goal number 16, use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. This is where the onslaught of LGBTQ craze has come from and been rammed down our throats over the last couple of decades in the name of civil rights. So make no mistake about it. The LGBTQ activists, they have one goal in mind, and that is to put a muzzle on Christianity and to silence Christians who object to their behavior. It's amazing. It's interesting, isn't it? The LGBTQ, they never go after Muslims, do they? Even though Muslims are even more emphatic against LGBTQ beliefs by far, even what we'd call moderate Muslims, than almost all Christians. But you never hear a word about Islam, do you? You never hear a word about them going after Muslims or Muslim beliefs, but they do go after Christians. And there's a vile hatred of Christianity from the LGBTQ community. And you know, you can dress it up any way you want. Well, it's because you won't accept us, you won't acknowledge us as human beings. And we acknowledge you as human beings. We just don't agree with your behaviors. We don't agree with your philosophy. We do not believe that you can just, because you say you're a man or say you're a woman, what you can just change genders at your own whim. We just simply disagree with that, and we disagree with it based upon the Bible, and we disagree with it based upon science. And I realize that people don't like that, and so they want to destroy the right to even say that. So these bills that are coming through the Congress have gone through in the last few years. These are, you know, the Equality Act or the Freedom Act. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called the Equality Act. Is basically about silencing, destroying Christian schools, destroying churches, so that you have no right to not hire somebody who's transgender. If you don't think they should, you know, if a guy claims to be a woman, he can come in dressed like a woman, or not dressed like a woman, claim to be a man or woman, and you're supposed to be able to have to hire him. You know, this is insanity, but this is what has gained it. So the courts are being used to weaken the institutions, weaken the family, weaken the very institutions that strengthen and hold up the country itself. Communist goal number 17, get control of our schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum, get control of Teachers Association, put the party line in textbooks. My wife was a school teacher for many years, very good school teacher. I have a lot of friends who are school teachers. I have relatives who are school teachers. But the current education system in America is broken beyond repair. I don't think we can resolve and reform the current education system. I've come to the conclusion it needs to crash and burn and be rebuilt, because it's secular. At its roots, it's secular, and anything that does not have God at its roots is ultimately going to become ultimately corrupt. And the secularized humanistic education system in America is anti-God, anti-Christian. It's anti-America now, even though there are many patriotic Christian teachers in the system itself is broken. The teachers union in America, the NEA, National Education Association, is about as far left as left can be. We've been warned for years that this is a Trojan horse. It is undermining the nation. It is the greatest threat to Christianity in the country. It is the greatest threat to our freedom. It is indoctrinating our children with communist ideology. It is teaching our children, these institutions, from the kindergarten through high school, in especially the so-called higher education systems in America, are teaching children to hate America. Now they're teaching them to hate people of different ethnicities. If you're Black, you're to hate white people because we're oppressors. And teaching them to hate police officers, that the cops are racist. This is ungodly communist ideology. And now we have what's called critical race theory that's been around for a long time. And anyone who says it's not in your schools is lying. It's in all these schools. It's in their books. It may not say critical race theory, but it's equity. It's under new names. It's the same thing. And this is what people don't recognize. They don't recognize that these communists, they don't come out and say I'm a communist. And as a matter of fact, most people who promote communist ideology, they're not communists at all. They don't call themselves communists, but they're promoting communist ideology is what they're doing. They just don't know it, but it is communism. Social justice movement, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, they're all communists. It's communist at its roots. And yet, unfortunately, most parents in Americans are completely unaware of communism in our public schools. A lot of parents defend their public schools. Well, we have a great school. No, you don't. You don't have a great school. Almost all schools in America are broken down cesspools. Look at what they're teaching kids. Now, unless your kids are going to a private school, almost all public school systems have become compromised through humanist secularism, communist ideology. And a lot of parents look at this like, well, you know, I went to public schools. My kids went to public schools and they turned out all right. These are not your mom and dad's public schools, folks. This in the last few years, the public education system has become engrossed in corruption more so than it has ever been. Right now, these public schools are broken beyond repair. Now, if you're a public school teacher and you're teaching in those schools and you're doing the best you can, you got a tough job. I realize it because there's no discipline. You're being pressured to accept these ideologies. You know, my sympathies to you, and I understand. And you need a job. So I'm not slamming you. If you're part of the woke movement, if you're part of the problem, then yeah, I am slamming you. But if you are a godly person teaching in a public school, trying to bring influence, my hat's off to you. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that parents need to do all they can to get their kids out of these schools. If you can at all homeschool your kids, by all means do. If you can get your kids into a private school, by all means do. We have got to get our kids out of these institutions. We've got to get our children out of public schools. If we don't get them out of these government schools, we will completely lose the next generation, because the public schools, the government schools, are indoctrinating kids in communism. So I know these are not things most people want to look at, but think about it this way. Imagine you're sitting in your house and you have a window that points one way, it points to the east, and you look out your window and it's beautiful, sunny, and clouds, and it looks great. And then the other window to the west, if you look out there, there's a ominous looking storm on the horizon. And you look out, and that storm tends to want to strike fear into you because of its potential destruction. And so what you'd rather do is focus your attention on the bright blue skies. And I really feel that's where a lot of Americans are at, and a lot of American Christians today. They want to hear happy things. Oh, tell me everything's going to be all right. Tell me the world's going to be wonderful. Well, you know, I bet you our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan who are being slaughtered, whose children are being shipped off to Taliban for their sexual perversion. I bet you they'd like to hear that too, but they're not. That's the reality they're dealing with. And I think we can stand to handle a few things that aren't just happy, rosy things. This is the reality of where we're at, folks. We are in danger of losing our country right now. We are in danger of losing our children. We are in danger of literally being put underground as the church. And if you don't think this is true, you're not living in the real world. So let's stop focusing all of our attention on the window with the sunshine and the clouds. And let's take at least a gander at the fact that we have a storm that is upon us. And if we don't wake up and begin to act right now to take the necessary precautions to stop what's going on, number one, becoming active at the local level, showing up at school board meetings, showing up at county board meetings, showing up and getting together and defending our rights. If we don't do this and stand up together, we won't be able to stand up at all pretty soon. Well, our time is up tonight. Again, I realize God is with us, and he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I'm not scared. I'm not saying this to put fear into you. I'm saying this to wake you up. But being fearful is not the answer. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but we must wake up to the reality we are in a battle and we are in a war, and the war is not going to end just because you don't like it. And if we don't wake up and we don't take some precaution, we don't take some action, we will wake up in a few years, or at least our children will wake up in a communist country with a boot on their necks. And we don't want to see that happen. Well, blessings upon you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. In Jesus' name, amen.